E agora vamos olhar para a defesa. Ganhou
And now
relevância
let's
por
take a
razões
look
que nós
at defense,
sabemos,
which
não
has
só
been,
pela
which
geoestratégica,
is
temos
quite
conflitos
relevant,
do mundo
not only because of the
temos também a utilização de
strategic
novas armas e aí entra a
aspects. We have
tecnologia.
the use
Temos
of
também uma
new
cimeira da
weapons,
NATO onde
also a
saem
NATO summit
notícias que
where
levam a
news
que o investimento na defesa seja
is
agora
priorities
prioritário
about
até
investment in defense be a
2035,
priority
salvo erro, isso
up
mesmo,
to 2035, 5%
of Portugal
the
também, obviamente, não
GDP
fica de
of
fora,
the
vai já
NATO
avançar com
members.
1.000 milhões
Portugal
ainda em 2025,
will
portanto, há toda
pay
aqui uma
1
oportunidade
billion
de
by
negócio, de investimento e também de
25.
investigação.
By the
É isso que
end,
vamos falar a
there's
seguir.
a
Para já,
research
vem
and
o nosso keynote
development
speaker, o José Neves, que é diretor de Segurança e Defesa da
characteristic
GMV
which
e
is very
presidente da AED
important.
Cluster Portugal.
And now we're
José
going
Neves.
to listen to José Neves, president at AED Cluster Portugal. So defense, due to the defense, is at the top of the agenda. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to speak about defense, especially at this Congress. It's been topical, a sector which did not make many decisions made took 30 years at a low budget, and would only come out in the news because of corruption and other. It was, and the fact is that over these last few months, everything has changed. We have a lot more information, either good or bad, on defense, and it's very important at a democratic level because the media outlet mentioned the 5% in defense, 3% is for defense, and 3.5 is for critical infrastructures, which is the pillar of democracy and the media. Detecting fake news is also being addressed by 1.5%. I'm going to speak to you about three nodes. What are the technology which lack? What is AED doing in Portugal? And third of all, how do we want to address defense in the next years to come? Not only speaking about 1%, 2%, or 5%, these 5% or 2% or 1% should be well used, that there be an economic return for our national industry. Defense has been revolutionized, has transformed new technologies, AI, transformation in new technology, AI, quantic, new material, a vast array of elements that transform strategy and also transform operation logistics in the military. We're speaking about land, air, cyberspace, sea, which are new. And these technologies have already opened new markets. Defense has invested 23% GDP in the 20s in terms of companies, and other transformation using new technologies make there be new products, more other supply chains that can be addressed by defense industry, very small in the sector. So it's a room of opportunity, and this is my second note that I want to address. This is the defense scenario in 2020, and this is what we want to transform. We want to place Portugal either in air, land, sea, where Portugal clearly has a continental projection to the Atlantic and be used the best possible. And we need to create a cluster capacity. We went from 60 entities to over 150 today, and this aggregates 20,000 jobs, a turnover of more than 2.1 billion yearly. Then we have Airbus, Embraer, and also Portuguese companies like Metacare, of Ogma that are will be worth in the next 2 years more than 1 billion euro. That is, the numbers presented will increase by 30-40% the next years to come without any investment. Let me repeat, without investment in defense, that is, in terms of an open market, a global market. So this can happen if we have the capacity developed, we have enough capacity which has been developed, technological, such as design, designing the inside of ships and airplanes, and these are the capacity. We have national companies, foreign like Embraer or others that were developed in Portugal, developed structures, infrastructures, aeronautical structures, either in different components, developing new components and delivering airplanes like Boeing, Airbus, and Embraer have some component. They have a system or a component that has been developed, produced in Portugal, which is quite interesting for those that work in that field. We also work in air traffic controlling system. We also work on maintenance. Everything that goes that's in the air or in the sea, it has to be maintained. The aeronautical system is very important. Aircraft, that is, the aircraft is very important in terms of what is being managed for the whole world. We develop systems for cockpits, and even last week, 2 weeks ago, there was the signature of a protocol between Critical Software and Airbus at the Paris Air Show, and Critical System will be supplying components to Airbus globally. We also have Portuguese companies developing satellites for commercial use. Was launched this year, last January. We have another we have 27 more satellites being developed, not only supporting the Atlantic construction, will monitor the sea, Atlantic Sea, but will support communication, provide support to surveillance. So a vast array of services that can be used by the military or also by civil protection, such as for forests or floods leading to natural disasters. We have helmets, we have safety jackets and others. They don't, so from ballistic protections to others, at this moment we've launched one more component in the sea sector, not only developing software communication for different vessels, but also at a level for producing ships, shipyards in Viana do Castelo. Also, cyber is seen as a pole between these two sectors. They have to communicate. Without cyber, they can't, and we have those cases that you've heard being mentioned on the news. On the production of drones in Portugal, several companies, Beyond Vision, A-Vision, Decor, Optimal, and others that produce drones, air drones, but also underground drones, which are being produced with high-end technology, but with a business potential which is enormous at a worldwide level. And we also develop aircraft. So I finished my course in 1997. I never thought we could develop aircrafts designed in Évora. Production will take place in Ponsor. The first flight will take place in 2026, in about a year. This means that, and the Galp representative mentioned that these challenges These challenges show that we can attract talent, not only Portuguese, but foreigners, either Portuguese that work abroad, and see Portugal as an interesting pole, not only because of the salary component, but because of the technological challenge to develop something that can make a difference in the future. And a drone can have a generation, or an aircraft that can transport civilians, and the military makes a difference when we project these clusters and companies to the outside. Last year we had Pastel de Nata and Port Wine to attract our visitors. What we've developed in Portugal per se is attractive. This picture was taken 2 weeks ago at an exhibition of people wanting to know what we produce in Portugal, of people that want to invest in Portugal, and younger people trying to understand what we develop and how they can work with Portuguese companies. So it's something which is very gratifying, and which is a joint effort of this cluster. And Professor, the former Minister of the Economy, Cisa Vieira, sponsored our cluster, and we've been growing. And with the support, and the governmental support is very important, especially when we speak of defense. Today we speak about millions in defense, 5% GDP, NATO, more investment, not less expenses. So how we can develop the industry, how to empower the companies to address the challenges, how we transform investment, not expenses, how we can produce more in Portugal. And we had to channel not only the European mechanisms which have been mentioned, the SAFE program develops joint development, deploys that financing. We have several European mechanisms that Miguel from EDD will mention about what are the mechanisms available. From AED's viewpoint, we're working on the proposals to submit to the government, not to spend but to invest well in defense, analyzing 3 pillars. First of all, how to develop the capacity to work in defense. The work is to buy a product from a shelf, not to develop it. What's cheaper might be more expensive. If we develop a product in Portugal where we can create jobs in Portugal, people pay taxes in Portugal in a certain way, versus a product which is bought in another foreign country, where we have to pay someone to produce it for us, and maintenance will be even more expensive. This has to be assessed. So this is a point that we've underlined. Another one is aggregating companies in a cluster. We're speaking about high investment. As I've mentioned, I showed you an aircraft, 200 million euros. We don't have an industry in Portugal capable to develop such an aircraft for 200 million euros. We need to learn how to work together, and this is one of the main clusters' role. We're not going to develop the 5th generation, but we can potentially work in this chain. How can we show abroad the capacity that exists in Portugal to provide this new technology and products? And we've taken a look at the differences, difficulties, challenges faced by the company in terms of cyber and others, raw materials they need. We analyze an important program in terms of public contracts, that is how to hire, to take part in a call and not it take too long. So the model is articulating the sector. We have the industry, ARD, an actor linked to defense and the government. How this link exists, very important to be able to understand the strategy that exists, a common strategy serving everyone.
We also pay attention to the market sector. How do we cooperate. We have the case of TechEver, and it has been acquired, and so they will have the possibility of selling drones in France through a mechanism that was not possible in Portugal. And on the other hand, thinking 2024, how can Portugal integrate a new generator of fighter jets, and how are these new technologies can be hosted in Portugal? And in the case of the sixth generator fighter jets, what is the availability for Portuguese companies to invest in the future in order to comply with these aspects? Miguel will certainly talk to us about how Portuguese companies can use European facilities to leverage the economic capacities. And so we have to have a vision of the product. And the dialogue with armed forces, with the army, is very important to know what the priorities are. So if the priority is underwater systems such as submarines, why not develop them together with the Portuguese army? And so we have to have a planning for 2 or 3 years' time. I said that in Portugal we have companies with a small number of employees, but very often it is difficult for us to apply to big tenders, whether in terms of what the military programming law possibilities and other European projects. So once more, only by talking together can we come with an answer. And last, how could we integrate major international chains? I just talked to you about fourth generation fighter jets. So nearly 20 years back, these integrate new generation technologies such as artificial intelligence or quantum technology. And this is indeed a very big turnover for the US states. The same applies to Italy, Denmark, and the Netherlands. So these projects are good in size. We have good cases in Portugal, such as the Lockheed or with Embraer in the case of other projects. And these projects have brought about value and caused the expense to bring return to companies, especially in Portugal, by having well-paid salaries so that we can have better and better equipped armies. So it is possible to be a leader in innovation. We have the case of drones, airplanes, satellites. It is very important to articulate with the different stakeholders, the government, defense, and the industry. We should also define a collaborative strategy, and we should also act well, act with speed, and act with ambition. So TechEver is an example, whose worth is indeed very important. So thank you very much. I'm available to answer any questions. So good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Muito bem, está colocado em cima da mesa este assunto. É um assunto, ainda há pouco falava aqui com os meus convidados que já passo a apresentar ali atrás e dizíamos...
On the backstage, we were talking about how the defense has improved and changed. So we'll talk about defense in a broader way. Ms. Pedro Tequis from TechEver and Miguel Correia Pinto, who is the head of knowledge at IDD Portugal. So let me start with this company who has just arrived in the market, and we
which has been a success. So how do you reach a situation where defense was not so important? Were you anticipating, or was this merely an investment you wanted to do? Well, there is no global answer, because many years ago, probably 10 years ago, Tech Ever understood that robotics were worth investing. We were incorporated in 2001. Engineers from our universities, we were very much attracted with space engineering, and noticed that by the year 2001 we had our mobile phones were not the way they are now. And 2010 there is a market analysis, and we decide to invest in robotics technology, and we start developing skills in the field of communication, control, a part of technology, production of mechanical components, very much based on the development of innovation and creativity. At the time, we had a European fundings in order to create networks abroad, to talk to European partners and also with potential end users, and we were not yet imagining that the current situation would emerge. So we were considering robotic agriculture, car inspections, and a whole array of things. So when does this major boom appears, and when do you enter in the defense sector? Well, you see, defense has always been under our radar, although without the expression it has now, because we see that these business areas that work with defense, a classic type of defense, which has to do with surveillance and protection of the sovereignty of countries. So in 2017, we had a European project with the European Maritime Agency, and some of the knowledge we had was then consolidated. Actually, this was a seed which in the right time has delivered its fruits. And so when these issues, the current issues started, we already had this technology. And I think that a few years back, the different branches of defense realized that we had to work together. And so when the Ukraine situation arises, we had already given proof of our knowledge, and the war just came to consolidate a capacity and a strategy that was quite a long-lasting. Just to give you an idea, before the conflict, we were already supplying our products at an international level. No, we have always been focused on the international market. Actually, we export 96% of everything we produce. Of course, that the war context has dictated a new scale, especially due to the speed it occurs, because over the last in 3 years we were challenged to develop a technology which is used on a daily basis, and that a week after it becomes obsolete. But always with the army, with the armed forces or with private security groups. We've had the possibility of collaborating with several sectors. Security without being the military sessions. We have surveillance operations in the sea, as well as with the British Home Office to surveil, to monitor the channel waters. We also have drones providing security pipelines in Africa in partnerships with private entities, because security is quite an encompassing topic. There are several and different needs according to, but we are able to provide a set of capacities that allow us to be autonomous, to have endurance, but always in the field of defense or also in the field of attack. We do not develop armed capacities. We have drones, we can transport, arms. Well, it depends on the end purpose by the end customers. We have rules, strict rules about that. We do not do it. We have a civil area of services, while in the military areas, we also have rules on the purpose of the end use of these products, whether, and we do not control the end use. We don't know what are the missions in which they are used because they are classified. So far, we haven't developed attack technology, but if need be, we do have the capacity to do so. Now, Miguel, in terms of our talks and the backstage, we in Portugal have an armed forces that complain they have obsolete capabilities, and then we have one of the a company with the big success. Is this a proof of lack of union, or is it only lack of money? Well, the situation of the armed forces of the army in Portugal is indeed very typical, and it results from a set of political choices by the Portuguese citizens who have elected their representatives. And of course, they decided to invest in other areas. 50 years, since the last 50 years, with the end of the overseas wars, then we decided to invest in other areas. Now, Portugal no longer has a defense capabilities, although we are part of NATO. So this collaboration continues to exist in the field of defense. Last week, I was reading work presented by the European Union, and it had two variables: the distance from the capital of each country with regard to Moscow, and the amount of and the weight of this at the level of GDP. And we knew that in the eastern countries where the threat is closer, they have to, we had to have more, to pay more attention to the Eastern Europe. Now, with the invasion of Ukraine and the changes in the US, more attentions have to be devoted, because we have a real threat to the East and high-level uncertainty in the West. And to what extent is the perception of the citizens having acknowledging the need for defense technology in association with a startup or private company? Well, in democratic regimes such as the one we live, we see tensions between the end use of the products. But you think that this paradigm is shifting, and that from this moment onwards, this is only an issue of money, because we started lagging behind, and now is this a need? But this, of course, entails competition, tremendous amount of competition. How are we to shorten the gap? Let me rephrase this. We see the needs for the short-term acquisition of ammunition, for instance, but for a small country such as Portugal, decisions are not made only at the national level. It has to do with the base sovereignty, because under the process of the creation of the EU, there are some policies that were allocated to Europe, such as common strategies, common mechanisms in Europe, and they have been reinforced. And so, as a result of all of the readings that I have made, I conclude that this evolution is there, but also at the European level, this is the convergence of the wheels of their sovereign states. So when you talk about sluggishness of the EU, it results from interests that were not yet perceived. But we're also referring to the sluggishness of Portugal. We have to speed up in order to reach 2%, 3.5%, and 5%. Let me ask you whether the conditions are there for us not to continue to lag behind and be at the same level in this race, where there is a component of political analysis of which I am not familiar with. But how will you join the forces in order for the result to be the one you want? Well, at the defense level, we have investment challenges which are significant at the level of production, and most of the systems used by defense, we know that Portugal per se is not a player. For instance, when it comes to TALS, Navantes, BI systems. According also to my personal position, the participation of Portuguese companies is made through big programs. And for instance, we have some tools at the level of identifying the technological evolution, and both in NATO and at the EU, groups exist that are analyzing it, and so specific profiles are needed, and they are competitive and are integrated in this work. For instance, the Camptex, they have communications, field operations, and so on. And so some of these companies, through R&D, will try and understand what has happened, and also to set up networks in the field of value chain. But we see that we had speed up these processes. This at the level of R&D. Now, in terms of procurement or acquisitions and funding, we had some programs such as the European Defence Fund. We see priorities because actually this is equivalent to Europe Horizon that includes the market, whereas in defense you have no market for defense. it's not a market from an economic point of view. And so the priorities of the European defense are made up of representatives of the ministries of defense. They have a long-term planning, and we also try companies and Portuguese R&D centers to participate. But this conflict in Ukraine allowed us to understand that there is a speed up, and so the war has become cheaper, especially with the drones, and we're thinking about the sacrifice drones, those who make the attacks. Because not all drones are cheap, for instance, for data collection and so on. So it has transformed the war theaters, because we see that there has been a surgical attack in the production of arms. But this is, on the other hand, we see that knowledge has exploded, and we have to monitor and follow a significant number of technological areas, and the generation of knowledge cannot be alone in the field of the military. We have to work together with other innovating companies, and in the field of startups, both at the NATO level and through the fund, the European Innovation Fund that has been replicated by the EU, we see several things happening in order to achieve technologial maturity. I don't know if the war has become cheaper or not, but war is done very differently than in the past. You also referred to the beginning of robotics. Where are we going in terms of defense labs at the level of artificial intelligence? Is it connected with cyber attacks? When you think of defense, and I'm sure you as a lab will be beyond robotics, where is it that you should pay attention to the companies that want to invest in the field? Well, defense will absorb technology, provided that they see advantage in the field of engagement, in tactics, operations, and technology. If there is one side that can be used and which offers all of these advantages, then this will happen. AI today is being used in several scales, although it is a buzzword that is used for many things, to help you develop new products or to make artificial intelligence autonomous, both to attack and to defend. Well, we are having artificial intelligence that will help us, for instance, identify information we have, so it comes as a support to the operators. They will learn to the missions and will help us design response mechanisms. It will help us with training. So AI is more than a tool, it is a toolkit. Are we going to have a trigger economy? Well, these are not the engagement rules we have, but this is a possibility, because if you're thinking of defense, then you have to consider the attackers. Well, in abstract terms, of course, that anyone willing to use technology without being limited to the rules of war can do whatever they want. Now, in states with a rule of law, this will not be done, because we have the woman on the loop supervising or making the decisions. There are some tools that are more automated than others. there is a moment of engagement, and otherwise the context will have to be very well defined in order for it to be automatic. But the context is evolving more and more, and it's not only it does not fall only in pulling the trigger. For instance, we may run the risk of having an unreal scaling. The classic example, for instance, we have the stock exchange. We have one talking to the other, and so we have to pay attention to this. Other topics we must provide attention to is when artificial intelligence points up to a solution, and it's up to us to make decisions, because we are giving a whole number of solutions that are offered to us. If I am under stress, I will decide on the first that appears, but on the other hand, we have to count with the psychological drivers. We must always guarantee that the IA we have is a responsible one, because we are not here making up things. We have codes for these, so we know exactly what we're doing. But no doubt, we don't know what is it that we will find on the other side. We also are so much concerned with technology, and the operational theatre is not only of high technology, it is actually a mix between low technology and high technology. Now I have $1 million question. What is the most powerful weapon at this point in time? Well, this requires a lot of analytics, but from a strategy point of view, those who are persuasive ones, we're talking about nuclear and submarines, because these are most difficult of being, of knowing where they, of locating them. If we draw a line from Lisbon to capitals that are far from Moscow or eastern countries, but this is not where we have the submarines. We have the sea, back, and the higher risk is there. And so we must pay more attention to see why is it that we're not invest, because we do not perceive the real damage we are exposed to. When we talk about this technology, more complex ones, do we have regulation? But in war, sometimes there are no rules. How are we to, because when we have states and natures who abide by the international law, and others which simply do not, and they simply don't care about courts laws. Well, I'm not the right person to think of it. But in terms of regulation, I don't know if they abide by the rules of rule of law.
They're present in the rule of law in democratic states like ours, and this has been understood. This question is raised, can be raised. Let me go back to the distance of Moscow and the coast, for instance. We're always in alert in terms of on alert, that is in terms of hybrid war. We also heard a different technical fail. We heard speak about technical failures. I think that this is the test. I'm not going to answer your question, but this is what I'd like to raise. We're speaking about underground cable. The Navy, Portuguese Navy, is part of different working groups accessing ports, cables. There's a monitoring follow-up of these topics in Portugal. And so we have sea, land, and land, sea, land, and air. So there are people speaking about information warfare, which can be another military field with different areas concurring one which deserve attention, although some can be highlighted more. Up to what extent Portugal and Portuguese companies, we know that there is now an international but not national context. There are entrepreneurs, there are businessmen, businesswomen following us at home. The defense industry will move. There'll be some movement. What are the sectors that need to be attentive when we think about defense? It's a world. It's not only weapons, other aspects and strategies. Where can there be a growth? There's a defense context, and we've had many companies linked to AERD, and they've wanted to ask more about what are the opportunities over the years. Not all supply levels have been met. Suppliers are missing. There's a lack of supplies. It's not only to increase the stock capacity to create the ammunition capacity to bring to Europe an industrial capacity that no longer exists. The value change in Europe, this value change that starts with more basic components, rare material, which Europe doesn't have a lot of capacity to control, and other components until obtaining a final product. It means that Europe will have to invest, need companies to bridge these gaps, to recreate that capacity. This is a subject, and with the due, and let's be clear, with the distances that exist, when we look at Alto Europa, it was that supply chain to the assembly. Can we think about an Alto Europa a defense like Alto Europa plan? Portugal has to understand its dimension. We're not 300 million like in the States. We can't be everywhere because we don't have critical mass to be all over the place. We're probably not going to deploy submarines, but maybe drones. Maybe we might not deploy systems launching into the orbit complex things, but maybe be able to develop software. We need to understand what Portugal can provide to its NATO partners and to increase that capacity and to supply deliver together. It entails, when I have to scale my production, I need also suppliers. And if I'm integrating new technology, and some of this technology comes from a startup, how will I scale a startup in a context where they're going to ask, when they're going to ask to fill into 100 or 1,000 forms for the state or any business relating to defense? It's not specifically to defense. There are specific authorizations for purchasing and selling, but it's much more complex, from sustainability and reducing the red tape. Now, we've We've spoken about the fact that we haven't had an accelerated strategy, that is to think about what is the final focus. It implies making decisions that nobody likes to make. For instance, I buy this or that, I invest in that sector, I invest in another one. So again, we need to understand where we want to be and to invest, not invest. I think that in view of our timing, Portugal has given some proof in certain areas. We have software sectors, textiles, aviation, where we've already given what Portugal, the proof that Portugal knows how to consolidate its strategy. If we start an industry that's going to take 20 years to be successful, it doesn't mean it won't be able to, but we'll be projecting 20 years from now that success. So there is here, there's a quick win management, which isn't easy, knowing that our means are limited in relation to projecting ourselves for the future. A joint purchasing investment will enhance it. There are mechanisms that can support some industries with new ideas. Startups are possible. You need to scale up. And we need an ecosystem that is an auto Europe for defense, and which is that is established in that sense. Miguel, what are the sectors of the economy that can benefit from this defense leverage? And how do you overcome now will to invest that what exists in an international market with the rules which are necessary, but which are burdensome? It's not only Portuguese, it's not only a Portuguese problem, but the EU speaks about public procurement, different companies try to produce their companies, then we have the missiles, meaning that there are interoperability issues, critical mass for public procurement. These are mechanisms are being developed to purchase in the EU, streamlining prices being fixed. This has been identified and it's being customized. Regarding our national economy, they don't go from one area to another. Tech ever is not going to be doing that. But there are some areas in Portugal, and people won't be surprised by that fact, like telecommunication, in terms of research, telecommunication. We spoke about textiles, their properties, camouflaging properties, drones, anti-drones. And there are water drones, air drones, land drones, and so on. Engineering. Now, what is relevant? It's to understand that this is being done. That is, Portugal don't have companies integrating complex companies, but they do integrate consortiums. We're speaking about this will happen to 5 or 10 years ago. The strategy will be different, and the strategy followed by the countries are very different. France has a different type of strategy. What it follows, Spain as well, we can't replicate. What makes them unique? What makes these countries unique? At the onset and assessing the segment, they were able to maintain a defense industry, and they do have customers. But in Portugal, we had a defense industry which was closed. We were relatively autonomous in relation to systems, ammunition. We don't have a market. We're only 10 million. So we need to analyze these aspects, and each countries protected their own strategy, their own industry. So we are here to work. In that sense, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to speak to you, and I'm sure that next time we'll be able to speak about the outcome of that investment. Carolina is now going to speak to us about innovation.